a big step that maybe not only the United States, maybe the world takes is that they never take a second to view North Korea from the eyes of North Koreans. How do North Koreans view themselves? I'm not saying that whatever North Koreans say is right or wrong, but that they have to at least understand why North Koreans say we're doing this, we're doing that, and this is the reason why.
First, we're joined by David Yoon, who is a activist and filmmaker, and also Korean American. Yes.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And we're also joined by John Prysner, who is from the organization A.N.S.W.E.R and PSL, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, and A.N.S.W.E.R is the organization Act Now to Stop War and End Racism. And he also he's also actually been to the DPRK, is that right?
That's right, yeah. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, thank you for coming. And lastly, we are joined by Mark Sommer, an educator and also someone who has a great interest in Korea as well. Okay, so thank you all
for having me.
Yeah, thank you all for coming. Mark, I'm going to start with you. Like, how is it that you think differently about North Korea than most Americans?
Well, look, I don't think that the human rights there, I don't condone a lot of the lack of democracy there and democratic reform. However, South Korea for many years was under a military dictatorship. It wasn't until they developed their economy that they started political reform. And I feel that if we were able to get some sort of sanctions relief or some ultimate peace treaty, that eventually we could trade with them, and hopefully, consequently, they would also have political liberalization. Mm-hmm. That may be unrealistic. A lot of people think it is, but to me, it seems plausible given what happened in the South. I think it will take a lot of time. I think it will be a long and arduous process, but I think it is possible under the right conditions. Mm-hmm. That's how I see it.
Do you support, say, a peace treaty with North Korea?
I do. I think we should have one. We have an armistice that was signed, I believe, in 1953, but it's been a cold peace. It has held. It's been successful. It's been effective, but it's not brought closure or reunions among families or free travel or disarmament. Mm-hmm. So I think ultimately it would be a good thing to have. Of course, we have the issue of strategic imbalance, you know, the strategic dynamic with the nuclear program, but I think that should all be part of a comprehensive settlement at some point.
Right. Okay. Now, David, you're Korean American. Mm-hmm. You are not, you're a U.S. citizen now, mm-hmm. but you were born in South Korea. Mm-hmm. And you came here, I think, when you were a child.
Yes.
And how is it that you came from South Korea to the United States and you're a U.S. citizen now, and you know, you are what many people consider pro-North? How does that happen?
Yeah, so I guess, I mean, you know, it wasn't like a crazy, you know, religious conversion or anything like that, but it was a crazy, I would say, intellectual conversion, I guess I would say, because, you know, I grew up in South Korea, and although, of course, you know, like back in like my mom's generation, they used to have straight up communist drawing competitions where, you know, you draw the best, scariest looking communist, you win the competition. You know, it wasn't like that, but of course I was taught my entire, what little primary education I had there, that, you know, North Korea is bad, they started the war, they're always, you know, planning to get us and whatnot. And I believed everything I saw on the internet, especially like social media. My friends would post stuff like North Korea executes 10,000 Christians for having a Bible, something like that. You know, I believed all those kind of stuff. And I remember I would always tell my mom, North Koreans are barbarians. You know, why do you always talk about them as if they're normal people? They're not. And long story short, my mom introduced me to these group of men. They're long-term political prisoners in South Korea. And they live in a house, a collective house together. And I went there, I believe, about the summer between my junior and senior of high school. and I met them, and they were the most angelic men I've ever met in my life, and these were men that have been in prison and tortured for decades. And so that kind of really made me think, well, I thought North Koreans are evil. You know, what the hell is happening here? I thought, you know, they're supposed to be acting different. I thought they have, you know, horns or something. But they didn't, and that really made me look into what I thought I believed, what I thought I knew, and led me here. Yeah.
So meeting these men, it opened these former political prisoners of the South Korean under military dictatorship, I presume. It made you open your mind a bit, and then you did a bunch of research on your own, and then that led you to be like, okay, you know what, I didn't know what I thought I did,
right.
And that changed your views.
Yeah,
okay, thanks because of your mother.
Yeah.
And you used to argue with her, I guess.
I really did, yeah. I really did.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how about you, John? Like, how did you go from being an American citizen born and raised in the United States, and here you are going against what 99% of Americans think? Like, how does that happen for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult process for most, and that most Americans don't go through because we're surrounded every day by the exact same narrative from the media to social media, like you said, or the state or elsewhere telling us the same thing, that, you know, if people were to rank what countries they think are the most evil, you know, North Korea would somehow make it at the top of that list all the time. But really, it was when I started getting involved in activism and started learning more details about the history and really having to re-educate myself. You know, going through public school in this country, you really don't learn. Actually, I can't recall learning anything about the Korean War, even the, you know, pro-U.S. narrative that we're fed. So once I kind of saw the dynamics of, you know, the United States empire and just how far and deep its tentacles are, I kind of started to, of course, question that maybe everything I was being told wasn't true. And by getting involved with the peace movement, with the unification movement, learning more about that, really kind of helped me see things in a different way and understand the history better. And then, of course, you know, being there really solidified my understanding. And you know, because even knowing things in abstract and understanding how oppressed nations have to try to survive under various different ways, you know, really seeing it in person was not really an experience that I can really describe, but it was something that really stuck with me.
So when did you go to visit the DPRK?
I was there in August of 2017, so that was right before the travel ban went down.
Oh, like a month before, maybe.
Yeah, it was during the time when Trump made his Fire and Fury famous genocidal remarks. We watched that from a cafe while we were there, actually.
Oh, you watched that from the DPRK, from a cafe? You were watching Trump talking?
Yeah, live, that came across.
That's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, but, you know, there are people who would say, whatever you saw in North Korea, it's all a show. It's fake. It's not real. They put on a show just for you.
Right.
How do you respond to that?
Yeah, that's definitely like the #1 thing that I hear when I'm trying to tell people. But I mean, look, I mean, could you really realistically fake what I saw? I mean, we didn't just go and sit in Pyongyang. We went all throughout Pyongyang, met all kinds of different people, went all the way south to the border, went all the way west to the countryside villages, went all the way north to the mountain areas. And, you know, this is where the vast majority of people live. We stopped along roadside stands. We talked to random people on the street. And even just passing thousands of people and seeing their interactions, seeing their body language. I mean, the fact that they could somehow get all these people together and be like, okay, the Americans are here. Everyone, get your Grammy-winning acting skills ready. It's just kind of preposterous.
Right. Okay. Okay. So, Mark, you as someone who is not necessarily pro-DPRK, but you're pro-engagement, you want to get along and, you know, be friends, even if you don't like everything that's going on there. Have you been accused by some of your peers or family and whatnot of being brainwashed or being a pro-North communist or anything like this? And could you tell us about it?
I haven't necessarily been accused of that, but people have considered me a bit of a softie on, yeah, they're some of my friends. When I share stuff among my friends who aren't on study groups, they don't really understand they don't really have access to a lot of the resources that I have. I read a lot of Korean papers. I know the spectrum, the political spectrum of the news outlets in Korea. I know which ones are on the progressive side. I know which ones are on the more conservative side. I try to mix it up as far as what I read and certainly what I would post. But I would consider myself sort of middle of the road. I mean, it just depends on the issue. When you talk about the strategic issue, the nuclear issue, what we're talking about is people, a lot of the people in government want CVID, which is complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization. I've talked to some of the people from the DPRK or people that have lived there for maybe several years and worked there, and they think, one of them referred to it as a balance of deterrence. And that is why they propose partial nuclear disarmament with a certain amount of strategic arsenal, because I was told or read that many years ago they figured they couldn't win conventionally because it's so expensive to keep developing weapons, etc. So they made the decision to try a strategic deterrent. So that's why they call it the balance of deterrence. It's, we have the conventional advantage, and they have nuclear weapons as a end-all, deterrent.
Right.
Do I condone that? No, but I understand part of the rationale for it. That's kind of what I think.
Now, people have said that, how dare North Korea, the North Korean regime, spend so much or waste so much money on developing nuclear weapons when they can't even feed their people. And yet others have said, I've heard of some say that actually their success in developing nuclear weapons has actually enabled them to save money on military spending.
That's what they're saying, yeah.
And to actually spend more on the people.
Correct.
Oh, so
the arduous march was a big impetus for that under Kim Jong-il, the second hereditary successor to Kim Il-sung. And Kim Jong-il believed that they needed a strategic arsenal. The arduous march, you could lay a lot of blame for a lot of things, crop failure, drought, what have you. But they did make that determination that they couldn't keep up. South Korea was developing so fast. And under a centralized economy in the North, it became harder and harder to compete, especially with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of communism in Eastern Europe and changes in the Soviet Union.
So what is the arduous march? What is that?
The arduous march was a period of famine. I believe it took place, gosh, I'm picking my brain here. I believe it was either 94 or 98 or there in between. It was a giant famine. Roughly 1 million people died. If your viewers are interested in the topic, I would suggest watching Crossing the Line, narrated by Christian Slater. It's a documentary. It's a BBC One documentary.
Joseph Dresnok, the U.S. soldier who defected, right?
He passed away a few years ago. I believe his son is still alive. Fascinating story. I believe his son was born to a Togolese mother who is also still alive, I think. Dresnok met her. She was the daughter of a diplomat there. They have a child, that boy, between them. He died a few years ago, but the son, apparently he's still around, and some people are still in contact with him. I don't know. But that they talked about why he, as an American defector living there, was given rations, and people all around him were dying, He asked, why am I alive? And why are they, It's complicated.
Right. Yeah, as I recall, he was married to a woman from, I think, Romania or somewhere in Eastern Europe.
Belarus, was it? Or
perhaps.
I think he had a second.
Yeah, and then she passed away. He had two sons with her, I think.
Yeah.
And then he got married again to a woman who whose father was a Togolese, I believe, a
So
Togolese
that's true.
diplomat.
That is right. I got that right. Okay,
Right.
yeah, I thought so.
And yes, he did. I think he did pass. I think in 2016.
Yeah,
or so,
respiratory
right.
problems. He was a heavy smoker, but fascinating how they took care of him. I saw the medical people, treating him kindly, and he would go fishing down on the Taegu River up there?
The
Taedong River.
Yeah.
Fascinating. The geography was amazing. I couldn't believe it. I mean, like so quiet, but just really never seen anything surreal looking.
Right. David, John, I'm sure I would say you would consider yourselves not middle of the road necessarily, but actually pro DPRK. Now, you guys have probably gotten into some arguments or some debates with your friends, family, what have you, and maybe they call you brainwashed. I mean, when it's just you going up against the entire media and our leaders and everything, I mean, how does that make you feel? How do you speak out? How do you speak what's right, what you believe against what they believe based on everything they've heard their whole lives and from our leaders and everything? I mean, it must be frustrating, yes?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say I've had a few intense, conversations with people where people get really flustered. There's an amount of cognitive dissonance that you go through when you're so sure that you believe something and for someone to dare go against it. But honestly, I'm really happy to be able to have those conversations. I mean, the whole time I was there, the sentiment that I got from people was that they really appreciated so much that we were there so that we could tell our story to other people. On the last day we were there, we were having dinner in a restaurant, and our hosts were asking us, what did you think about your trip? And one of our other people who was on the trip with us, she was saying, oh, my family was telling me not to go. It's too dangerous. We won't bail you out if you get in trouble. But she said she was really happy to tell them what it was really like. And someone overheard us and came over and was in tears and wanted to give her a hug because she was so happy to be hearing this. And really, I feel like that's my responsibility and responsibility of others who know the real story to really share it. And, it's not to say that it's a perfect country, or really any country is a perfect country. I mean, we live in the context of global capitalism, where there's no country is even an island. But this is an oppressed country. It's a country that's doing the best it can up against a country, the United States, which, if we're going to go pound for pound, the words of Martin Luther King, the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own country. So as people in the United States, we really need to take a really hard look at what's going on right here, or even the CIA, by the CIA's own number, we have far more people in prison than the DPRK does.
Per capita?
Per capita, yeah, exactly. So just pointing out some of these things which are kind of clear things to kind of break down the different layers. And there's a lot of layers to go through to break down the propaganda for people, but that's kind of how I approach it. Starting at the macro level, saying, should you really be trusting what you're thinking? Everything that you're getting is coming from, 16 corporations?
I think it's even less than that now.
Oh,
I mean, AT&T now owns CNN, and you know that? AT&T owns CNN.
Really?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
AT&T bought out, Warner Media, or Time Warner, which owns CNN, and then Disney owns this. And
In fairness, there's still a lot of news organizations. You just have to know where to look. For example, in Korea, I think there's quite a few, I can think off the top of my head of 5 newspapers across the spectrum that I look at regularly.
Okay, great. Now, David, you, especially as a Korean American, as an Asian American, and I know as an Asian American myself, I feel like there's this thing within us as Asian Americans, we feel we're trying to fit into this American society, mainstream American society, and we're told, hey, America saved Koreans from communism, and Vietnamese fled communism and came here. And I feel, especially a lot of Asian Americans, even second generation Asian Americans, when they grow up in this country, they feel this sort of like, I got to be grateful. I have to, really follow what they say. I got to be grateful. I can't speak out. I got to be thankful. I know that growing up and hearing like, oh, my grandfather fought in the Korean War, or you should be lucky that you're here. Some kids will say some things, or some teachers might say some things. So a lot of the most anti-DPRK or anti-communist statements I've heard are from fellow Korean Americans, not even like white Americans, but Korean Americans. And so I'm sure you, as a Korean American, you've probably had some very fiery conversations with, or arguments with fellow Korean Americans or Asian Americans. So could you tell us about some of the more, like, how extreme it can get? Or
I think the term brainwashing is very applicable here, because I think because more likely than not, you probably see that word applied to North Korea, right? But if we're going to talk about brainwashing in North Korea, I think we also have to talk about what I would argue is brainwashing on the other side, because in my experience as a Korean American, as someone who grew up in South Korea a little bit, I visit there frequently, and also more importantly, I think the Korean American, like I said, that the diaspora here, there's a disconnect between North Koreans and South Koreans, and I think that's just something unheard of, because even when for thousands of years, even when Korea 2,000 years ago, when Korea was in the Three Kingdoms period, Goguryeo, Silla, and Baekje, those were three states, but the borders weren't militarized. There was no sense of, oh, you're from Goguryeo, you're not my people. There was no sense, people traveled freely, there were different states, and there was no sense that you are North Korean or South Korean, even until 1948 when liberation, 1945, there was no, there was no sense of, you're North Korean and I'm South Korean. And I think coming here now, as I was growing up, hearing South Korean Americans talk about North Koreans as some kind of different people, even though they probably don't know, but they probably have distant relatives in North Korea. I think that's very interesting because, I believe there was something like what you call brainwashing at play, where you convince these people that not only are North Koreans not you, they're them, but they're your enemy. And I think that's, like you said, that does lead to a lot of arguments and whatnot. Like you said, in my experience, the most heated debates probably came from other Korean Americans.
Would you say you've lost some friends or had some damaged family relations as a result?
Yeah, I mean, my aunt's family, they always tell me to not follow your mother's footsteps. I don't know if they know that I am, but yeah, definitely, they're in South Korea, and I definitely can think of people in my life that probably, either stayed away from me a little bit because of, what I've been saying and whatnot. Yeah.
Okay. Now, I know you produced a documentary, maybe 2 years ago, called Loyal Citizens of Pyongyang in Seoul. And in this documentary, you basically interviewed, I think, a human rights attorney, and then you also interviewed 2 North Korean defectors who live in Seoul or live in South Korea, who still support the DPRK government. Can you tell me why you decided to make such a documentary? I mean, why wouldn't you just trust the well-known defectors like A.N.W.E.R Park or Shin Dong-hyuk or these types? I mean, what made you do this?
I think, I honestly think it really ties back to what I've been talking about. Like I think, at least in my community, I come to contact with most, people my age. And truth be told, people my age do not read. Nowadays, I feel like social media and fast spreading news that's like kind of how people get their information nowadays. And so I thought, okay, well, if staring at a screen and learning is now how people learn their information, then okay, let's use that to to my advantage. And I thought if maybe I portrayed them as they were, stuff that they were saying, which is so unexpected, because when you hear of North Korean defectors, you think, I'm so glad I escaped. I found haven in, capitalist South Korea and whatnot. And it's I thought even if one person from North Korea says otherwise, that would almost break the cycle, because it wouldn't make any sense, right? Why would someone from North Korea who's lived, in the case of Mr. Choi, who was one of my interviewees, he's lived in South Korea now, I believe, for about 15 years. And so, what I was trying to do was at least get people to ask question, okay, why is this guy who lived in South Korea, who's supposed to be better for 15 years, still trying to go back and still saying good things about where he's from? That, my objective there was to at least try to get people to ask questions, because I feel like, instead of telling them what to think, I feel like asking, leading them to ask their own questions might be a lot more efficient in spreading what I believe is the truth.
미국 집 앞 경찰 옆에서 사람 무서워서 경찰 옆으로 다가가서 옆구리에다 먼저 손을 총 뽑아낼 판인데, 아니 자기 나라 인민이, 미국 같은 거 자기 나라 사람이 설악에서 서진아 딱 총 발사해, 호수문에 손에 딱 총 있는 거에서 총 발사해서 죽여. 아니 어린 학생이 자기는 말을 듣지 않았다고, 그것도 여학생인데 경찰이 어제 돼지 같은 경찰들이 서너 명이 달려서 두드려 패고 손을 뒤로 묶어가지고, 그게 뭐 말라빠진 인권이야. 그리고 다른 나라 사람들을 붙잡아다가 테러분자라고 소리.
I mean, it does, occasionally you see in the news, you hear about another defector who wants to move back, but you would think such stories would become like big headlines, like, oh, this is crazy, why would anybody want to go back to that hell on earth?
Right.
But they're always like kind of buried somewhere, like on, like there's very small stories.
Yeah.
And yet, A.N.S.W.E.R Park, who I think, there's been stories about, how credible her stories are based on the numerous versions of her stories, and the fact that apparently she gets quite a good payment for giving speeches. Why do you think it is we only hear from them and not like Mr. Choi that you interviewed?
Yeah, I think that's I think that's probably the number one question that I got. I think it was, well, what makes you think they're believable if you're saying the other defectors are pretty much lying? I think, I did cover a little bit about the cash, the cash background, the money, the role that money plays in the background. I think that why they're more credible is because, one, if you look at Park Yeon-mi, who's, I think, probably the most famous or popular defector, I personally wouldn't call her pretty, but, she is portrayed to be like this, almost like a damsel in distress kind of thing, where, this poor Asian girl is speaking and crying, because she made her debut, I believe, in 2013 at the World Peace Conference, something like that, where she was in hanbok, and she was just crying, talking about...
I remember that, yeah.
Yeah, how... her mother got raped, which later she said that it wasn't her mother. It was, she changed the story. But yeah, I do think part of it does come down to aesthetics. I think, specifically in case of Park Yeon-mi. But other than that, though, why we hear more about stories from Park Yeon-mi and Shin Dong-hyuk is because the U.S. has been leading. What it's trying to make is a perpetual war with North Korea, right? The armistice, like you said, it was signed in 1953, but hostilities have not ended, and and some people don't know this, but there is still exchange of fires within the DMZ with South Korean soldiers and North Korean special forces and things like that. The war is not over at all, and in order to keep, what I think is that in order to keep the public from, for supporting a perpetual war, you need a perpetual enemy. And so how do you do that is you convince the public that, bluntly put, these are people that we're in war with. These people deserve to be sanctioned. These people deserve to have humanitarian military intervention. And it fits that you would push these stories because you are pushing a military presence in South Korea. You are pushing a military presence in Japan. And so it would make sense that if you want to keep a war going, you need public support for it.
Okay, but, why would the United States want war? Why wouldn't they want peace? I mean, America's the leader of the free world. I mean, why would they not want to I mean, why do you think? Why wouldn't they want peace? Why would they want?
What do they say? Wars are good for economies. Okay, yeah, they've said that for years. I think we're starting to get to the point where we're realizing that peace can be profitable too. I think when we get to that point, we'll start realizing that opening up markets will probably be much more valuable to our economy as soon as we can get the whole sort of like the roles right with Korea, you know? A lot of people think that they're a vassal or that they're so close with China, and we've had our friction with China, so it's kind of been caught in the maelstrom on that. Then we started thinking, can we peel North Korea away from China and turn them into, I've been told also by somebody who's lived there for 7 years that they prefer U.S. products. They like U.S. cosmetics, stuff like that, you know? So, yeah, you have to look at it as a market thing, you know, opening up a market and selling it to people rather than, you know, transitioning from a military industrial economy to a consumerized economy is the big challenge facing us going forward, you know, with all these other things going on. Mm-hmm. If we could start doing that, that would be the peace dividend. That would be something that I think would be a lot of people would be interested in under the right security assurances for everybody.
Right. Okay, so you think, okay, war is good for business, but you're thinking, well, you know, if North Koreans buy American products and stuff, that could also be good for business, but you feel that idea hasn't really caught on yet with our leaders?
I think there have been a lot of political obstacles to doing that. Mm-hmm. For a number of reasons. I think a lot of it, the most recent one was the A.N.S.W.E.R incarceration, and then, you know, that whatever happened, we don't know, you know. That was the beginning. Then they started banning travel to North Korea. People can't go there. They're saying they extended it for another year. That's not good, but I've heard that they're easing up on humanitarian sanctions to help feed the people there, because, you know, I don't think that you should politicize people that are hungry. You know, everybody should have a right to have food and medical care.
Why do you think, you know, if we care about human rights and the well-being of the North Korean people, why do you think the United States puts sanctions on things like aid? Why would they do that? What is the purpose of this? Yeah. What do you think?
I don't think it serves any purpose. I think it's a mistake. Mm-hmm. That's what I've been saying. I've thought that for a long time. You have to be careful, though, because people, you know, especially people who are a little bit more, you know, conservative, and, you know, they're you know, think that it's so bad. You know, we can't work with them. Look, we opened up with Mao, and Mao killed 20 million people in the Cultural Revolution or something. I mean, you have to talk to your enemy at a certain point, you know. That's how you create peace. You don't talk to your friends, you talk to your enemies. And I think that it was a good start with Trump going there. And I wish that, you know, they could continue that if whoever gets elected next time around. I'm not saying who will or won't, but I hope that, and I think they have come to a point where now that we've met, I think it's less likely for sort of an accidental thing to happen. So I think we've reached a level of sort of like understanding, at least, that I think that ultimately we're going to build a better understanding, even if we don't sign a peace treaty right away. But I think ultimately we should. I hope we do. Okay. It's been 70 years. How many years has it been? 70?
70.
Yeah, that's a long time.
Yeah. Okay. Now, I'm going to ask you now, John. You know, why is it that you think the United States, you know, why won't we, okay, it seems the DPRK has been asking to sign a peace treaty, and they say they want to have good relations, but why is it that we won't sign a peace treaty with the DPRK from, let's say, a socialist perspective? Why, you know, why?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great question because it seems to defy logic. You know, the North Korea's, yeah, they may have a few nuclear weapons, but, I mean, the military budget of the DPRK is roughly the same size as the budget of the NYPD. It's a country that is in no way a threat to the largest empire in human history. So, I mean, why would be because the United States is an imperialist country, and that may be vernacular language that some people would say is outdated. but the material conditions and the economy is still structured in those ways, in the same way that it was when the idea of imperialism was formulated.
Right. I mean, imperialism. You talk to the average American and you talk about imperialism, be like, hey, the United States is imperialist, and they're going to be like, what? So what is imperialism? What is imperialism? What is U.S. imperialism? What does that mean?
Yeah, well, first off, the United States is a capitalist country. Capitalism comes before imperialism. And capitalism is a system that's not based on logic, it's based on profits. And not just profits, some profits, it's based on ever-expanding profits. The stock market, they always want it to go up. If you're an investor, you want the value of your investment to go up infinitely. Which is not a logical system because we don't live in an infinite world. So when a capitalist country gets to a point where it can no longer increase its profits, it has to look for any way to get profits that it can. One way would be to lower wages or take away social services. But another way to do that is to exploit markets in other countries. So we have a system right now where the United States has extended to countries all over the world. You have McDonald's in the Philippines and Japan and Europe. And it's got all these countries that are compliant with U.S. capitalist interests, and then there are countries that are not compliant with U.S. capitalist interests. Cuba, China, North Korea. So it's these countries that the United States wants to target in order to try to either overthrow their governments, to install a government that does suit the U.S. government and corporate interests, or to try to get in there somehow in another way. And you've seen this same thing play out over and over again with all the, dozens and dozens of countries the United States has overthrown. When it comes to North Korea, I'd say there's a bit of a bigger twist to it as well, which is it's not just that the United States wants to take the markets of North Korea. I'm sure the United States would be very happy to subjugate the North like it does the South and turn it into a neo-colonial state. But in addition to that, the question of China is also, we have to remember, central. The DPRK is no threat to the United States, but China is a rising power. And China is rising within the rules of global capitalism and is not falling apart. The United States expects these countries that don't comply to implode on themselves, and it's doing its best to try to break it up, but it's not. And the United States is, as we speak, ever since Trump took office and he signed the new national security strategy and the nuclear posture review, the United States military and all its contingency planning and all the positioning of where its troops and equipment is and all of its budgeting is built towards preparing for war with China and/or Russia. So this is a military consideration. The United States needs that foothold in South Korea to have troops so that it can launch a land invasion of China if it so chooses, or at least to have the threat of a land invasion so it can put pressure on the government of China in order to hopefully one day overthrow it from within.
So the United States the military is not in South Korea to protect them from North Korea?
No, I would say not. Even the THAAD, the much disputed THAAD missile system, where the United States puts this system, they forced it into a town against the will of the people who are protesting every day. It causes all this pollution. They're saying, we need this. This is going to protect us from missiles. But even the THAAD missile system would not protect South Korea from a low-flying nuclear missile. But the THAAD does have extremely large radar range that reaches deep into China. So we have to kind of look between the lines, look beneath the surface of what the U.S. government is saying and what they're doing.
Right. So you think the United States military in South Korea is not about a North Korean threat; it's about China.
China and domination of the Asia-Pacific region in general, where 60% of U.S. forces are now deployed, and yeah.
I think on THAAD I agree. On THAAD I absolutely agree, and I think that's well known, because at least by people who understand the system, because it does address long range, but not low flying. There is a way around that, especially for if they want to do a real quick hit and run type thing. We don't have any. THAAD probably won't protect against that, and that's also why China was so much boycotting travel and purchases from South Korea A lot of companies that were based in China of South Korea had to close because they were starting to it's starting to slowly come back. Fortunately, we haven't talked about Japan either, and that's really kind of important to talk about also. It's, you know, I mean, they're kind of in the radius of all that's been happening too. You know, a lot of these missile launches are going into that, what they call their economic zone, which is gosh, I think it's a 200-mile zone off their coast, which, you know, I don't think North Korea recognizes, or at least when they, in the past, when they've launched, they've shot it into there. And fortunately, I think we have a period of calm, and I don't think it's perfect, but knock on wood, we're in good shape as far as them having some dialogue. So I hope they keep it rational, you know?
Right. Okay. Earlier you said the Republic of Korea, South Korea, is a neo-colonial state of the United States. What does that mean?
Yeah, so, should have explained that term as well. Yeah, you know, in the old days, in the colonial era, you know, you could say the mask was off. There was really no kind of question that countries that the United States or Spain or the other colonial powers, there was no question that they were just dominating these countries and installing dictators or pure colonial magistrates, or like Hong Kong, for example, where a British guy and the Queen were in charge of the government. And nowadays, you know, those kind of sensibilities are not quite as acceptable. So a neo-colonial state is a state where there is ostensibly an independent government, and yet that government has very limited power. South Korea is in many ways a perfect example of this. I'm sure you could elaborate on this, but for example, in the event of a war, the South Korean military falls under the control of US generals. Is that really sovereignty? Could you really say that they can make their own decisions?
So the South Korean military ultimately is being controlled. The number one, the defense of South Korea, their military, what keeps them independent, or supposedly, or whatever, it's controlled by the United States, you're saying?
It's supposed to change over to local control, or I should say South Korea control. But U.S. forces in Korea, yeah, they are commanded by, you know, even, for example, I think the ambassador there, Harry Harris, was a U.S. Forces Korea commander, was he not? I think, at one time. But yeah, they're talking about turning over the reins to local, but if there was a crisis, you know, who knows what would happen, you know, and knock on wood again that doesn't happen, but yeah, it's that way.
So if a country does not control their own military, is that an independent, I mean, what do you call that? I guess that's what you mean by neo-colonial state.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's a big word for it, but I mean, and that's kind of an extreme example. I mean,
right.
of colonialism, of neocolonialism. I mean, and a lot of other forms it takes is through usurious loans and through the IMF and giving countries these loans in order to expand their markets, and because they have no other choice, because they need to develop, they exist within the world capitalist system, and then holding it over their heads. U.S. military bases. You know, the United States is really an empire, but it tries to pretend like it's not. It doesn't necessarily, you know, it instead has all these military bases and embassies in all these countries that it uses to exert control. And really, the United States, whatever diplomatic or economic, you know, things happen, everyone knows that the United States is the 800-pound gorilla in the room. It sits wherever it wants. We have the biggest military. We have a military bigger than the next 10 countries combined. We are now even going so that it's gone so far as to now they want to have a control over space. They want to have control over the heavens and control the planet below, and the ultimate display of American power. I mean, this is a dynamic that other world leaders are very aware of.
There's, excuse me for jumping in, there's a good book, and it was written by a professor emeritus at University of California, San Diego, Pacific Studies Program, Chalmers Johnson. Are you familiar with them? You should read The Sorrows of Empire, because it alludes to a lot of what you're talking about. He writes a lot about that, and over overreach, all that kind of stuff. He was good. He was very well respected too. So don't be afraid to hold your views. You know, you're not alone. Other people feel. I'm kind of in between on that. I don't know. I mean, you know, I feel yes. You know, capitalism constantly has to keep growing, but at the same time, you know, if we can subscribe to like a web of interdependency, you know, we're all connected at certain levels, and trading, you know, armies go where trade will not, you know, and if we can't trade with North Korea at a certain point, something will happen and something will implode. And I think that's why I think we should try and get something going. For example, Kaesong, I don't know why we're getting in the way of getting that restarted. If they want to have that going between North and South, we should allow it. You know, yes, they don't pay him very much. They pay him like nothing, but, you know, under the right, you know, sort of like conditions, it could work. You know, it's too bad they closed that. They did that after they did their third nuclear test, I think, or something like that. So that's, you know, they haven't closed it down completely, but it's something that should be considered at a certain point to, you know, restart if they can do it.
Are you saying it's the United States that's preventing it from restarting?
I'm reading that, you know, they have to get sort of like the green light. It has to get green lighted by the U.S. for it to happen. But I don't know if that's entirely true. Look, you don't hold me to that. I don't know. Maybe they could do it on their own. Moon is he listens to Trump a lot, but, you know, if they could work it out between themselves, that's a good way to start. But, you know, that would depend on nuclear test freeze and no provocative launches. You know, if they can keep doing that, they have a chance of getting that together.
Right.
Yeah, I remember this was a couple months ago or something like that. I remember that Trump made a comment. He said, "Don't worry, the South Koreans will never do anything without our permission." I think that's something that is really interesting about Trump, is that he, in a way, I don't know if he does, I'm sure it's not on purpose, but he exposes a lot of what, whether it's Republican or Democrat, would try to hide. He just kind of puts it out there and says, yeah, the South Koreans won't do anything without our permission. And of course, the South Korean administration just takes it and took it and have been taking it. And I think that's another very clear indication that South Korea does not have sovereignty. When it comes to loosening sanctions, maybe it was offered, didn't happen because the U.S. didn't allow it. I mean, among so many other things. I mean, the U.S. For such a rich and powerful country, it can be very petty. I mean, for example, when the North Korean female, I believe it was U17 World Cup team won, I believe it was last year, and the finals game was in Japan, and they were supposed to receive money, but because of sanctions, they did not receive money. I mean, something as small as a, U17, World Cup, and of course they have restrictions on Olympic players and whatnot. Yeah.
Now, regarding what you said about Trump, what I found interesting about the Trump victory was to see all these liberals. All of a sudden, they cared about people being deported. All of a sudden, they cared about all these things they didn't care about under Obama. And I felt like, do they really care now, or is this like, is Trump just sort of like they only care because he took the politeness away from U.S. imperialism, and he just said, hey, this is what we do. South Korea doesn't do anything without us, or what he said about Syria, we took the oil, we took the oil. I mean, so maybe, so in that way, like, are liberals? I don't know how to decide.
Well, Trump brought up the cost burden sharing thing with South Korea more than Obama did. Okay, so Obama didn't really badger the South Koreans about paying more for their share of the defense. Trump brought that up, and it kind of rankled some people in South Korea who said, basically, their soldiers don't make anywhere near what ours make, is what I'm reading, and the same is true in Japan. Apparently, the soldiers in Japan live in abysmal conditions, and they're not provided with military hospitals or anything like that. That's what I'm hearing. So I don't know, you know, I mean, those are issues which should come up, but what is fair for them to pay? How much should they pay of their own defense, and how much should we contribute? And that's a debate that's going to continue on, I think. But I think it's a matter of approach too, you know. I mean, you got to be careful when you tell people you were getting ripped off, you know, because then it could have a backlash effect too, you know. So you got to be careful to make sure that you don't do things that are going to like work against you in the long run.
Okay, now, as U.S. citizens, when it comes to voting, Democrats, Republicans, I mean, it's basically one or the other. Is there a party that's better for, let's say, peace with North Korea, or not? Are they the same? Or is it just a turf war between two gangs?
Well, that's a very good question. Do you mind if I start?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, I'll tell you, I was in contact with a friend who I'm on with study groups as well, who is a Republican. He supports the Republicans very much, Trump very much, and he believes if Trump is reelected, that Trump would support not abandoning, but perhaps sort of tailoring CVID and maybe accepting a partial limited nuclear possession de facto of the North under the right conditions. But generally speaking, you know, they would sort of craft that under a second term. He hopes, if he is fortunate enough to get reelected, that he would complete the mission, which is perhaps not realistic anymore, CVID. I think he even acknowledged that, and I think a lot of people, he's a little bit more conservative than even Trump. He likes Pence, you know, and you know, so I think there's hope, you know. As far as the Democrats, whoever that may be, I think they're coming around. I do, and I think more of them are thinking, you know, maybe we should get the travel ban, you know, stop, let people go there and interact with people over there, which would help. That's my opinion. That's not my opinion. That's just what I'm hearing, and I kind of agree with it. So I don't really know.
Okay.
I hope it gets better. I think it will.
Okay. What about you, John? What do you think? If we want peace with the DPRK, with North Korea, should I vote for a Democrat or should I vote for a Republican?
Wow, I mean, there's so much to say, but I think the most important thing is that we can't rely on any Democrat or Republican to get peace. The only way that peace, or really any progressive gain that people have ever won in this country, has been through mass struggle. It's only because people put pressure on politicians that we're able to get things passed. Like Roe v. Wade, for example, was passed by, you know, under an extremely reactionary Supreme Court, but it was because there was millions of people in the street fighting for it. I mean, with the situation, just to comment briefly on the Democrats and the Republicans, it's really kind of in a very bizarro world moment right now because, you know, understandably, you know, the Democrats and the Republicans, because we live in a capitalist two-party system, they're always both marching to the right. You know, every year the Democrats are like, oh, we got to try to pick up more people from the right wing, so we're going to move further to the right, and you have everything kind of shift, where now, you know, what would be considered a liberal, I guess, in the, you know, mainstream vernacular would be a right-winger, you know, a few decades ago. But so what I'm trying to say is that we're in this really weird situation now where someone like Trump, who is not an ideologue, he's a narcissist, he's an idiot, he really only cares about himself. I mean, we can speculate all day about why he's trying to pursue peace with North Korea. It may simply be because he wants to get a Nobel Peace Prize, or it is one of his more popular policy positions. But it's been really kind of disgusting and bizarre to watch the Democrats attack him from the right on this issue. Right. And not just the Democrats, we also have to acknowledge that our government is not just made up of Democrats and Republicans, it's also made up of billionaires and the national security state, of which there are people who are permanent, you know, the right-wingers like to call them the deep state, but in socialists we just call them, it's the state. It's the permanent apparatus of people who work in the CIA and the Pentagon, no matter who the president is. And when Trump started, not to ramble too long, but when Trump started to make all these moves toward North Korea, what happened? we got this extraordinary op-ed from, I believe it was the New York Times, of an insider saying that they were working against Trump, not because he was putting children in cages, not because he was saying that there were good people on both sides in Charlottesville, but because he was pursuing peace with North Korea and Putin.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that, you know, we're not going to get change just by voting for a Republican or Democrat. We need millions of people out in the streets. How are we going to get millions of people out in the streets to say, hey, we want peace? How are we going to make that happen? I mean, what do you think, David?
I think it's, you know, I think that really raised the question of, like, you know, if 5 people are standing outside an embassy and protesting, you ask, like, what's 5 people going to do? But before there's 1,000 people, there has to be 100 people. Before 100 people, there has to be 10 people. And I think that, you know, you really do have to do the grunt work and really keep, you know, agitating and mobilizing. And I think history has proven that, you know, people power really does move mountains. And I think, like you said, it's not going to be the Democrats or the Republicans that's going to make peace, not just with Korea, with any country that, with that matter. But it's going to be really the people that, you know, constitute, you know, like a nation like the United States, that really, you know, force change. Because I don't think anyone's going to be, you know, they're not going to be convinced of change. I mean, convinced for peace, because if they wanted peace, they would have done it by now. But clearly, peace is not on their agenda. So they have to be, like he said, they have to be pressured, forced to, by the people to, you know, do their job. And you know.
So it just starts with a small group of people, and you gotta just keep growing and growing and growing. Okay.
I think with relation to North Korea, the proliferation issue is very much of concern. And that they, you know, we might be able to live with North Korea having a couple of nukes. We might have to. You know, we might not have a choice. It's starting to look like we don't. But as far as them proliferating it to other countries, I think a lot of people are very concerned about that. You know, there are certain safeguards, but we need some assurances from them that they won't do that. I wish, you know. Those are some of the impediments to keeping things from getting better. And you know, the whole, you know, rogue thing, you know. But one man's rogue is another's revolutionary, you know, they say. But still, you know, who has a right to have a nuclear weapon, you know? Basically, really only the permanent 5 of the Security Council. Really, they're the only ones, but it's complicated, you know.
Right.
But that's a big issue, you know. We don't want a lot of people getting that.
So, okay. And, I mean, what do you think? How do you think we're going to get millions of people out on the street? I mean, he says start with 5 people. Do you agree with that? Just slowly build a movement, and then hopefully after a certain amount of time, there will be enough people, and we can start.
But what's the objective? I mean, you get 1 million people in the street for what? I mean, a variety of things, one single issue? I mean, what are they fighting for?
That would be difficult to get millions of people just for this one
Get people to vote.
Korea issue.
Get people to become involved and do things like this. That's the best way to change things.
Let's applaud ourselves. This is these are 4 guys.
It's a start.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of different things that we need to do. We need to take what opportunities you can, and David's point is very true. You know, we can't expect to start off with, you know, 1 million people right away. But in addition to that, you know, it's not necessarily a linear path that we have to build people like building blocks on top of one another. There's so many variables right now where there's a lot of energy under the surface right now of people really yearning for change in this country. And I think you can really see that with something like the Bernie Sanders movement, where someone who is really just, you know, by European standards, a center-left politician who never really made that many waves in Congress, but because there's this rising movement of people who are so fed up that when they get sick, they have to worry about being on the street, that the ruling class in this country, the rich, is terrified of that and trying to destroy him. And yet it's not destroying him, it's making him stronger, and more people are coming out in this mass movement. Something like that, you can really see that things can really change dynamically when we don't expect them. We need to have organizations. We need to have people who are ready to be there when things do change, and when the people are motivated and come out and are ready to come out into the streets, we need to be there ready to support them. Like recently when there was the real danger of war with Iran. You know, regular people who maybe never went to a protest were just kind of shocked and horrified by this, what was happening, and wanted to come out into the streets. And, you know, there were organizers there who were ready to meet them and say, here's a protest you can go to, here's a placard, here's a flyer to learn more about it. And, you know, we just kind of have to put in the work. It's a marathon, not a sprint, but things change unpredictably and fast sometimes.
Right, okay. All right, so we're going to wrap this up now. Hopefully this is the first of many such programs like this. But any final words about that you want to share about, you know, whatever you want to think about North Korea or North Korea-U.S. relations or whatever? We'll start with you.
Well, I'll keep brief. I hope they do get better. I think that the level of understanding, people are starting to accept that, you know, there are other ways of life, you know. We can't choose every single leader in this world, you know. It's maybe not our business, and as long as they don't bother us and they want to be left alone, just leave it. But, you know, don't starve people to death, you know. Allow some sort of, you know, people need food, don't block it, let it in, and, you know, we don't have to like what it is, but it is what it is.
Okay.
Coexist.
Coexist. All right. How about you, David? Final words.
Something that often gets kind of doesn't get attention, even though it would seem logical, is that nothing specific, but if you're going to call someone an enemy, I believe that if someone is your enemy, for better or worse, that you should understand your enemy, right? Because let's say you want to defeat them, well, you have to understand them. You want to make peace with them, again, you have to understand them. And I think the big step that maybe not only the United States, maybe the world takes, is that they never take a second to view North Korea from the eyes of North Koreans. How do North Koreans view themselves? I'm not saying that whatever North Koreans say is right or wrong, but that they have to at least understand why North Koreans say, we're doing this, we're doing that, and this is the reason why. I think that would, again, whether you view North Korea as enemies or whether you're trying to make peace, it's only the logical way to understand. And that, yeah, I just really do think that people should view North Korea by understanding how North Koreans view themselves and why they do the things that they do.
Okay. And
yeah.
John.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I would say is watch David's movie. It's incredible. It really kind of rips the lid off of the whole, you know, nightmare scenario propaganda. And, you know, if things that you heard today kind of made you question what you were thinking, you know, it's time to do a little bit of research into some, you know, there's lots of great alternative media that you can find. Like Mark was saying, we've got, you know, you can watch Empire Files. We've got information on Liberation News, another alternative news outlet. And there's many more, I'm sure you...
Ktown Social Club.
Ktown Social Club. Yeah, reach out to us. You can reach out to me. Twitter, at John Prysner. Send me a DM if you have questions. Hopefully you don't get too flooded. But and really, you know, if you really become motivated, you really want to see change in this country and in the world, if you're tired of endless wars, if you're tired of, you know, us spending over $1 trillion on the military, then, you know, it's on us, it's on all of us in this country, in the belly of the beast, to really get involved. And once you get involved, same thing that happened to me, you know, you might be questioning things or be curious, and then once you're part of the movement, once you see people in the streets, it can really change your perspective in a radical way to make you want to do things differently.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all for coming. Great discussion, and I hope we can do this again sometime.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Great.
I learned a lot.
Yay!